The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to thank Ranking Member Padilla and Senator Blumenthal, Ranking Member Padilla of the Rules Committee, Senator Blumenthal, for organizing a group of my colleagues to come to the floor today and for their leadership on this issue. We are focused on, as we saw last night, Americans turn out in droves to vote, to exercise their constitutional right and really their duty to vote. And we want to make sure that people can continue to stand up, to show up, whether they are Democrats, Republicans, or independents, to protect voting rights and ensure that every eligible American can make their voice heard in our democracy. I also want to thank the state and local election administrators, secretaries of state, poll workers, and everyone else in states like Minnesota, Virginia, California, New Jersey, and more who made sure that yesterday's elections went smoothly. It takes a lot of people and a lot of planning to do that. Yesterday, millions of people exercised that sacred right. According to preliminary data, Minneapolis saw its second highest turnout for a municipal election, with more than 147,000 people casting a ballot in its off year. And in Virginia, 3.3 million people voted this year, the state's highest ever turnout in a non-presidential election year. As Congressman John Lewis once said, voting is the most powerful tool we have to create a more perfect union. In recent years, from the January 6th insurrection to election conspiracies to threats against polling sites in New Jersey, we have seen an alarming rise in dangerous rhetoric and threats against election workers and polling places. Sometimes it's from other countries trying to do harm regardless of the political outcome, but wanting to mess around in our democracy. Sometimes it is people trying to influence an election from either side. We have also seen repeated attacks on access to the ballot box from this administration. The Justice Department has turned away from its mission of enforcing the Voting Rights Act, and the President has issued an unlawful executive order to overhaul our nation's elections that would purge American citizens from voter rolls and make it harder for the men and women of our military to vote. Just as the President overstepped his authority by implementing the across-the-board tariffs, I was at the Supreme Court oral argument today, along with Senator Lee and Senator Markey. I will say it was a well-argued case with pointed questions from the justices. I am very impressed by some of the arguments that were made against these tariffs by both the states and the lawyers for the small businesses, as well as some of the justices' discussions when it came to the tariffs, about Congress's right under the Constitution, under Article 1, our authority to assess taxes, not an unconstitutional delegation or an overreach by the administration. And so we have seen this overstep with regard to the tariffs, which is having calamitous effects on my constituents, small businesses, farmers, ranchers. One soybean farmer told me it was the perfect storm of ugly. But we have also seen this overstep when it comes to the Constitution and people's rights to vote. The White House recently confirmed that the President intends to continue his unlawful attacks on voting rights by issuing a new executive order targeting mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is nothing new. It dates back to the Civil War, and the President himself has said that voting by mail, voting early, and voting on Election Day are all good options. I agree, and Americans across the country agree. In Minnesota, we have made it easier, not harder, for all eligible Americans to vote, including by giving everyone the chance to vote by mail. We have people who vote by mail. Some of these states like Utah and Oregon, they have almost the vast majority of people vote by mail. We're not actually that. We're kind of a mix. We have the highest voter turnout in the country, nearly every election in the country. I go into a hardware store or a cafe, and I know that 70, 80% of the people have voted. Sometimes they'll come up to me and say, well, I didn't vote for you, but I did like this one thing you did, or I have an idea for you. That means something in a democracy. But that's because we make it easier to vote, not only with the mail-in voting and the drop-off ballots, but we also have it with same-day registration, which when you look at states that have that, whether they're red or blue or purple, that's probably the most defining thing about if you're going to have high voter turnout. And when you have high voter turnout, believe me, my state has elected everyone from Jesse Ventura to Michelle Bachmann to me. But what all of us have in common is that we had extraordinary high voter turnout when the people got elected. And that makes people feel like they're part of the franchise. That makes them feel like, wow, we're part of this democracy. We're not left out of it. And that alone is worth something in a democracy, regardless of who gets elected. In 2024, 36 states allowed voters to cast their votes by mail, and nearly 1/3 of the voters did. And that is post-pandemic. So instead of creating barriers to the ballot box, we need to expand access to the polls to ensure all eligible Americans can vote in the way that works best for them, regardless of their zip code. That's why I have led the effort with Ranking Member Padilla to advance common sense bills to protect our democracy, including the Freedom to Vote Act. That bill will increase ballot access and reform our campaign finance system to ensure that our democracy is of, by, and for the American people. And I will also note, with regard to some of the things that happened coming out of Texas, it also would make sure that we have a fair system when it comes to the House of Representatives and districts and what's going on there. That's also why I also strongly voted to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to restore and strengthen key portions of the Voting Rights Act. And it's why I've worked to give reliable federal support to state and local governments so that they can continue to administer safe, secure elections. This is something we should all be able to agree on. We must support our local election offices and help them maintain their election infrastructure to keep pace with new technology and combat cybersecurity threats. We should also be able to agree that we should stand by our election workers, including volunteers, who face a barrage of threats and intimidation. I remember hearing, when I chaired the Rules Committee, from the election officers in places like Pennsylvania, where a Republican election official was threatened simply because he upheld the election results. His entire family was threatened. Or secretaries of state who have the voicemails of the recordings of their families being threatened or their homes being threatened. And you think about these volunteers, particularly in rural areas or election officials where they don't have the police there nearby to protect them. That's why I lead the Election Worker Protection Act, legislation to provide states the resources to recruit and train election workers and ensure their safety. Protecting election officials should not be a partisan issue. The security of our elections is directly tied to the security of our election workers. Nothing is more fundamental to our democracy than our free and fair elections. Voting is how the American people make their voices heard and ensure their elected leaders are held accountable. So while we continue to see attacks on our democracy, it is our duty to never give up hope. Every election, it is inspiring to see Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike exercise their sacred right to vote however they choose. It was quite a reminder last night how people are going to vote, and they're going to vote for their families, and they're going to vote for their own economic security, and they're going to vote because they believe in our democracy. Even in an off-year election, when no senator is on the ballot, when no president is on the ballot, where not even a member of Congress is on the ballot, but 2 governors, and some referendums about the judiciary and some referendums about the elections and some local officials and mayors, people turned out, and they turned out in record numbers. So I hope that makes people realize that our democracy is thriving, but our democracy only thrives when we make it so people can vote. And I have been so proud of my state over the years. And again, we're a purple state. We've elected Republican and Democratic governors in the last decades. We've elected Republican senators in the last decades. We have a split legislature. One house is Republican. The state house, the state Senate is Democratic. There was an election last night on that front. We have an evenly split congressional delegation, 4 and 4, because we don't have gerrymandering, and we have actually competitive elections a number of years to these congressional seats. And there we are with the 1 or 2 highest voting turnout in the nation. Why is that? Because people feel like they're a part of it. That's what we want to have happen in this nation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.